I'd like to call the Board of Education meeting. It's October 22nd at 6:03. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Dolson?
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. I'd like to go into executive session. May I have a motion?
Second.
Okay. Roll call.
I'm sorry, who moved?
Fred.
I seconded.
Mark second.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Dolson?
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. We will now be in executive session. No new business will transpire. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We're going to reconvene, and we have item 4, recognitions. We have item A, a big recognition. So, are you ready?
I am. Good evening, everyone. So I have the pleasure of recognizing 4 very special students today. Last Wednesday, one of our elementary students, a little 6-year-old girl, went missing off the playground and was gone for quite a while. And when we realized that that child was missing off the playground, of course, we went into action and started scouring the neighborhood for this child. And we didn't really know which direction the child may have gone in. And so as we were going down the street, we ran into some high school kids that were coming out and said, hey, did you happen to see a little girl walking? And they were able to point us in the right direction, and we were able to find her about 5 minutes after we realized that she was missing, thanks to these 4 students who were that were so keen when they left the building to be able to pay attention to that and give us really good directions on where this child might be. So the child is safe and sound, and we just wanted to recognize it because you didn't have to do what you did, and you really saved this little girl. And you can imagine being 6 years old wandering out on the street. That had to be very scary. So because of these students, we were able to find her safely and quickly, and we're very pleased that we were able to do that. So we just wanted to recognize you and say thank you. So Adam Burkholm. Is it Pachuski? Am I going to say it right? All right. Vincent Delava. And Joseph Burdick. And if I can just get your picture really quick, that would be great. Thank you. Why don't you get it out there? Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right.
Great job.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you very much. We have 5 president's announcements. A, district communication.
You would ask me to put that on?
Tennis. So tennis is doing 2 fundraisers. The first of which is a holiday fundraiser. I will make sure to make sure that a link for that's on the district website. So you can purchase your holiday pictures and your graduation pictures and your senior pictures with this one lady who's local, and the tennis team is going to be able to get a portion of that profit. So that's something that they're doing as well. I also know that they are working, which I think is actually filled, on a tennis fundraiser where people are playing for 24 hours doesn't sound good. That sounds fun, but I don't think they're playing for 24 hours. But they're doing this mixed group, and people are paying to play for this tennis competition. So I know Mrs. Sabraco asked me to mention that, but please look mainly for the link for the holiday cards. And then we're going to move to item B, middle school auditorium fundraiser update. So we have these two ladies who are presidents from the middle school and introduce yourselves and tell us what you've been up to.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Denise Golick.
I'm Carrie Ely.
And we are the co-presidents of the middle school PSO as well as the co-chairs of the middle school auditorium committee renovation campaign. We have handouts for you lucky individuals.
So we
Thank you.
began learning about this back in May. Is that when you came to our
I
first
think
board
we
meeting?
came in May to ask about the naming rights, but we've been working with Joelle and Chris Code since the beginning of last year to kind of put everything together. So we're just gonna walk through this and then open up for questions.
Right, so we basically started our fundraising efforts this year. Last year was concentrating on getting organized, getting a committee formed, getting a bank account open, and then we started taking some actions in order to start raising funds. So do you want to go through that list?
So we formed a partnership with the Brecksville Kiwanis, which was a huge effort, and we've been working with Mr. Pedersen and the fellow Kiwanis on several fundraisers, which we'll talk about in the middle. So that was number one. We obtained permission from the school board to offer naming rights for the auditorium to potential donors. We formed a partnership with the G. Geronimo companies. They have graciously offered to provide us with a project manager to help us get better quotes. Mr. DiGeronimo did not feel that we were being dealt with fairly by some of these companies. We weren't taking us seriously. So we have a gentleman who's going to work with us to obtain better quotes. He also specified that, or said that they will donate to the project. He just did not have an amount that he was willing to say at the time. We obtained a commitment from the other BBH PSO units to donate over time to the project through their individual gifts and goals programs. We applied for and received a $8,800 grant from the Brecksville Broadview Heights Schools Foundation, specifically for lighting. And as of June 30th, 2019, we have a balance of $32,118, which does not include the $8,800 grant from BBH.
Okay, so we have a number of things scheduled for this year. We've got quite a list here. Let me go through these things. Denise, do you have the flyers? for
I
that?
do.
Okay, so the first thing we have coming up, I believe Mr. Peterson mentioned it at the last school board meeting, but on November 11th at 7 p.m., the Cleveland Orchestra Youth Orchestra is going to be performing at the high school auditorium. And we are working with the Kiwanis Group in order to sponsor that. So we are helping to promote selling tickets and getting sponsors for that event. So the proceeds of that will go towards our project. In February on the 22nd, we have a Rick Smith show, but it's not just any show, it is a Vegas style show. So he is going to be coming to all the elementary schools and the middle school to promote it to all of the students and promote selling tickets, and it's a splashier show than what he's done in the past. So we're looking forward to that. The Pancake Breakfast that has been held annually, the proceeds from that event are going to be put towards the auditorium project. Our gifts and goals through the middle school will be allocated towards the auditorium project. We're working on our fundraiser for this fall. The other PSO units are going to be giving us, well, hopefully they've committed in the past to giving us a dollar amount towards the project. We'll be talking with them about specifics this year. We also plan to send letters to the community to ask for donations. We will be meeting with potential large donors and as well as various community members and smaller fundraisers. So in addition to the $32,000 balance that we currently have, and then plus the $8,800 from the Schools Foundation, we anticipate raising approximately $82,000 to $92,000 in total by the end of this year, is our estimated goal.
That'd be terrific, yeah.
And on the Cleveland Youth Orchestra, we have been successful enough with sponsors that the expenses have been covered. So everybody that we can get into that auditorium, all the proceeds from now on go to the auditorium. So if you can tell anyone and anybody about this wonderful event in and of itself, it would be greatly appreciated. And we have flyers in our cars, we have flyers everywhere. So if you want flyers, let us know.
Okay. So the things that we have upcoming that we're working on, We're going to be putting an event online. Basically, it will allow people to make a donation online and also perhaps take advantage of corporate matches that are sometimes available to employees. We are looking at doing an adult-only evening fundraiser. We are working on a cookbook sale that would go next year, and identifying additional grants that may be possible to us.
So looking even further ahead, the past 6 months in talking to lots of different people within our community and outside the community, it has become clear that our efforts will be made much easier if the board or the district can identify a specific amount that they are going to contribute to the project. We have consistently emphasized to the public our partnership with the board and the district, and the district's commitment to contribute monetarily to the project at some point in time. However, the number one question we receive from the community and our own members is how much is the district going to contribute, in addition to why is the PSO doing this in the first place? We believe that having a specific contribution will help us obtain financial commitments from donors who have been otherwise put off by the $300,000 price tag. If we can say we have something from the district in large amount, we can say we have $100,000 from the PSO, then we have a much smaller window that a potential donor can say, well, you know what, I can't give $300,000, but I can give 10, I can give 15. I have friends in the community that I know can give 5 and 10 here, and that adds up quickly, and we get our auditorium faster.
It allows us to state a specific goal that we're raising money towards.
So
Which is much easier than having an open-ended fundraising.
and vague, well, we think, you know, we need to raise something, but the district might give something, and so on and so forth. So that is what we would like to ask the district and the board to consider getting back to us, preferably before we can send out these donor letters, so that we can set out our goal and what we need still from the community to make this happen.
And you want to send the donor letters out at the end of November?
Well, we were waiting until after everybody stopped asking money for elections and hit before Christmas and maybe before the end where they gotta have all their tax donations in line. So yes, that was our original thinking on timing. Ideally.
Any questions?
Just some background, you know, from a funding standpoint from the district. So, you know, most of our levies are operating levies, which means the money flows into the general fund, and that's kind of the big pot of money that you can use it for any district expense. Then we have other funds and reserved money for specific needs. So we also have 2 PI or permanent improvement levies that bring in, you know, about $1 million, about $775,000 on the one, $1.1 million on the other. The $1.1 million is reserved for, you know, textbooks, technology, transportation. So recently, when we offline Central and we talked about busing, we needed additional buses. You know, we talked through transportation model and what that would look like, and we were asked to purchase 5 additional buses. So some of that PI money is used for replacing buses, but we needed 5 additional buses. And the board approved it, but that money, which was $500,000 or so, it comes out of the general fund. So like our general fund is, you know, has like $20 million in cash, which sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but we just passed an operating levy, so that is a buffer. What happens with operating levies is you pass them and you tend to collect more money than you need on the front end, then you start kind of drawing that down on the back end before you need more operating money. And so, you know, our general fund took a hit from buying the 5 buses, and so any contribution that we make, you know, comes out of the general fund. So this is just some background because, you know, I know there was some talk about, you know, the tennis courts, which for what it's worth, we have been talking about the tennis courts for more than a year. And the challenge with the tennis courts is we kept patching them, but they are now to the point where you can't patch them and get any kind of guarantee that the patching will hold. So like on the tennis courts, you know, we have an obligation because we have a varsity tennis, you know, program in our district to provide playable surfaces. And so, you know, we had to deal with that situation, and that's still an ongoing situation. But where we came up, because there's been talk about $250,000 for the tennis courts, but what we looked at was the cost to redo all the tennis courts, at least the initial estimates were north of $500,000, which is a lot of money. And so we found an option that was $250,000, but it wasn't ideal for the tennis community. So that's where that number came from. Those of you who might have heard $250,000 for the tennis courts, that was the board willing to commit, because there was an option that we could get away with for $250,000 and have playable tennis courts. But again, the tennis community wanted to see the courts on campus, because that option would have taken them over to the city of Brecksville. And so their preference was, can you secure that financing for us and let us make up the difference to try to keep the tennis courts on the campus? So, some of the talk about that's kind of where that was from. That's where that number came from. That's why the board committed to it, because we were committed to having playable tennis courts. So we'll have to look at that and figure out what makes sense. But, just everybody keep in mind, as most people are aware, the new school that we're building is coming in higher than we had hoped that it would come in. And some of that bond money was going to be used for the middle school and the high school. And the more money we have to put into the new school, the less we have to put into the middle school and high school. And the needs at the middle school and high school don't go away. And all of that comes into play. So when we look at the general fund, if anybody looks at that and says, hey, you got $20 million, if you stick around the meeting longer, we're going to have a 5-year forecast, which is going to show how quickly that $20 million gets drawn down as expenses project to chew into it. So, I think we have to look at that and see what is the board comfortable with in terms of making a commitment to the auditorium. And we certainly appreciate all of the effort and all the volunteering and all the donations that come in. But the unfortunate reality is, just like the tennis team, right? If you want to be able to get facilities that you really want to see in our district, there's just not enough money in the general fund to fund it, and we have to augment it with fundraisers and volunteers. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give some of that background, because I know there's been talk about fundraising. Now we got to fundraise for the tennis team, fundraise for the auditorium, and unfortunately that's part of the situation we're in as a district.
Which we recognize, and that's why we brought this on ourselves in the first place.
Right.
So first of all, I want to commend you, because the amount you've raised in the short amount of time that you've raised is totally amazing. I mean, you've already knocked close to $100,000 off already, and it's huge. I will absolutely promise you, we will have a discussion. I hear what you're saying, and we're getting our 5-year forecast. We've just completed our audit. I mean, we can look and see what it is. I hear why it's important to you, and it will be helpful to you if you do have that with donors. So I will make sure that happens. You need it. You say the donor letters in December. Is that correct?
We were going to send them out after elections, November, December timeframe.
Which also offers a huge opportunity for flyer distribution at the polls. You can stand as well at the polls and pass out those flyers as well. People will be happy to see that's what you're passing out and not other things. I'm sure, especially in Brecksville. But that said, if you could get the troops together and tell them that that's an opportunity, and whatever else you have, all these irons you have in the fire, sounds like a good opportunity for you to stand at those local locations and get that out. And then, make sure you give me a stack as well, because I'm knocking on doors.
Well, and then I have one more question, because last year when this started, and I'm really bad at remembering numbers, but you had a number as to what you thought it was going to cost, and it sounds like Mr. DiGeronimo said, I think I can get it done for less than that. Do you know?
We don't have a number from him saying we can get it done for less than that, just that he feels like the pricing may come in better with them stepping in. So
We're
okay.
professional.
Right.
We weren't professional enough.
Okay.
Well, I think it was their feeling that they are a construction company.
Sure.
They're a
Oh, yeah,
construction
yeah.
company. They're going to have leverage that we don't have.
Okay.
Right?
Sure.
So do you have any feel sitting here today for what it might be? I mean, I understand it's going to be a range, but
I mean, our estimate is basically $250,000.
Okay.
But the lighting and the sound issues seem to keep fluctuating on exactly what we buy, when we buy it, and what actually is needed. Miles could probably talk better about all of that. We know that at least the one quote for the seats is $197,000. That's a huge chunk of it. Whether or not now that's only from one company never called back. I mean, there's not very many vendors for auditorium seating.
And that's not even the top end.
Right.
Yeah, that's not, like how square seating, that's, school auditorium seating. The stage curtain was $30,000, and again, we got one quote, and there's one other company in Akron that does it that we could get another quote from to compare. Those are that's the two like large sums of those two items.
Are you gonna work on everything at the same time, or are you going to do it, in parts?
Probably
So
all at the same time.
Okay.
If you can figure out how to carve out space for 5 tennis courts, I know where somewhere you could probably get $250,000.
You know,
I don't think we need a
Backstage,
parking lot.
maybe?
We don't need a parking lot.
you know, one other suggestion, it's probably too late, but early December is Giving Tuesday. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's,
Right.
it's kind of like a whole nationwide
foundation did
day
that
kind of
last
thing.
year.
Now, it's only, the problem being that we only have like a little over a month before it takes place of getting that out, but for what it's worth, I mean, people go to their wallets on that day. It just,
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so where's everything housed, so everybody knows where they can find all these things that you have in the works, or what you already do? You have links for all of this on the PSO website, or how
Well,
you
like
can?
the orchestra is definitely on the
Okay.
website already, and it's been blasted out to the little schools, or the other elementary schools. Rick Smith, we haven't done anything with yet because he's not till February, so that stuff will all be
Right.
sent out eventually.
But you make a good point. We have talked about having a tab.
Well, here's the other
on our
thing,
PSO.
just having, gone door to door, there's a lot of people in the private schools that would probably go to Rick Smith Jr., and they probably would go to the orchestra as well, and, so if you can figure out how we can get that, we can send that out through maybe the cities. They have do they still have the digital bulletin boards in the community centers as well? But we need to kind of push that out more, because it might be and it might not be, but I mean, winter's a pretty boring time here. So Rick Smith has got a huge
He
following,
recommended
so.
February, he said
Right,
February
for
was
sure.
the time to do it. And we already have contacts with the Mothers Club and the Montessori School to
Sure.
push him into those.
Well, St. Albert's
two.
maybe,
Right.
Assumption, they're good partners.
Mhm.
We're good partners with them, we bus, so maybe we can push that out as well, and I don't see why. Yeah,
Right.
and we'll take, maybe, we could take their fundraiser if they had something else as well, but maybe make more of those partnerships. But, and make sure you bring your flyers and we have that discussion. Okay, we'll have it
Appreciate it.
at the next board meeting. We have all the information we need, and I really appreciate you coming here
Yeah.
and staying diligent on this, because you have been amazing, really.
You get the Rick Smith flyers, let me have some, I'll pass them out my neighborhood, just like I did the Coyo thing.
He is supplying thousands to us.
Good.
He gets them pretty fired up when he goes into the schools. I know he came to ours,
He's
so,
very, very confident that he will get us $10,000.
For sure.
He
oh,
was,
that's awesome.
he was
That's great.
Yeah,
very confident.
right, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions, you know where to find us.
Okay,
Thank you.
bring the flyers in. So thank you. Okay, we're gonna be moving on. We have item 6, community communications. We have hearing of the public. Does anybody wish to be heard? No, okay. That's it. So moving on, item 7, board member committee reports. We have A, financial liaison audit committee. No. Okay, B, permanent improvement committee.
Meeting next week, Chris? Next week we're meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and C, board policy committee.
Yeah. We met.
We met?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, item A, district committee reports. We have A, transportation appeals committee, always a fan favorite.
Nothing new.
nothing new. Okay, CVCC, Mr. Gilbride is not here, and there's nothing new, although discussions have been happening about some ideas that we can be pushing out for CVCC. Safety and security meeting.
We did have our drill at the high school, and we will have a meeting first week in November scheduled.
Okay. Now, the video, there's going to be a video that's available. You're going to be sending that out about that security drill? Okay.
Yeah, you have seen the video. The video will be going out in constant contacts to our full community probably tomorrow.
It's very nicely shot, so just want to commend you on that if you did that, Miles. Pso report.
The PSOs are all involved across the district in their fundraisers. Heard the big one here at middle school, but also I just wanted to mention the band is selling citrus fruit. You can, if you know a band student, talk to them. If not, go on the website. Also, the orchestra is selling poinsettias for the Christmas season. So again, you know an orchestra student, go see them. Otherwise, on the website. If all else fails, you're welcome to touch base with me. I'll be more than happy to point you in the right direction.
Are you able to send those links out through Constant Contact for the citrus, for the poinsettias? Is that possible to put that on there?
I don't know. I will look into that.
Will you?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 10, superintendent's announcements. We have a Stop It app update. Mrs. Magyar.
Yes, so you had asked to provide an update on the Stop It app, how many downloads and just how many reports we've received. And this is one of those things where you don't want a lot of reports on there, so it actually the lower the number, the better.
So just to revisit, so the Stop It app is exactly.
So the Stop It app is an anonymous way for kids and or parents, but please know that the app was purchased for the intent of providing another avenue for kids to report if something was going on at school that maybe they didn't want to necessarily tell an adult. And they can download it on their phone, and it's an anonymous way to report bullying, or if there's something that is concerning, a text message will go right to the administrator at that building to let them know, and as long as we have enough information, we can investigate it, and again, it's all anonymous and respond back to that. So we've pushed it out a couple times to our parents. Again, it's available to parents, but it's really something that we purchased for kids to have that platform to be anonymous in reporting. And so we've had, since the start of it, when we pushed it out at the beginning of the school year, we've had about 7 reports. Those have come mostly from the same person reporting, and so it's one of those things where if you don't give enough information, it's hard to investigate. So if you put on there, I'm being bullied, and that's all you say, there's not much we can do with that because we don't know who you are, and it's hard to investigate something if we don't have names or something. So there hasn't been a lot of hits on that. Typically, we had a school safe helpline, which we still have, so we're running 2 systems currently this year. One will drop off at the end of this year, and we'll only be running 1. But typically on a given year, we'll only get anywhere from 2 to 5 calls to our safe help line. So our numbers are right in line and consistent with what we see, and we haven't seen an uptick in reporting at all from that.
Okay. We thought that might be the case because it was the
Sure.
case when they initially started in another district, but it hasn't been.
Hasn't been.
Okay, that's great. Okay, item B, non-routine bus discussion.
Yeah, so I might have to call on Chris here a little bit to help me with this. So there has been an interpretation of Ohio Revised Code with using non-routine buses for busing organizations and groups that are not our students. So for example, we currently allow the use of our school buses to bus people to the trick or trot that is coming up here soon. And so it would be adults in the community, it would be other people that might not necessarily use our school. The interpretation has come down that if we are going to continue to provide that service to those outside groups, that our drivers need to meet a different standard of a physical. It has to be a DOT physical, which is different than a T9, and I know I'm using a lot of numbers, but a T9 is what is the licensure in which our drivers currently have, and it's a different level of a physical. A DOT is what's it stand for? Is it Department of
Department of
Transportation?
Transportation.
So the DOT physical is a little bit, it's a little bit more intense than the T9 physical. And in addition, we need to carry some extra liability insurance on our fleet to say that we're using these buses for commercial use as opposed to just transporting our kids. So it's a discussion that came up as we do transport the Kiwanis, and we use our buses, it's about 7 times a year for this. City of Brecksville uses it, Broadview Heights for summer camps and that kind of thing. And so it's just really a discussion if we are going to continue to provide that service, knowing that it might be a different standard for our drivers and it's a different level of liability insurance, or do we, want to say that we're not going to provide that level of service and give a year's notice? We've been advised by our attorneys to not do anything this year, so we're already doing what we have agreed to do. So this would be something that we would put into place for next school year and just give a year's notice to all those organizations that we wouldn't be able to provide that busing for them for those needs.
Do we have any idea what the revenue is that we're making compared to what this?
Schools are not allowed to generate revenue, so all we're allowed to do is cover our cost. So whatever the service.
So no matter
is,
what the cost is gonna be, we could cover it.
We can cover our cost, yes.
But essentially, we're just taking on more risk for no
Yes,
real, yeah.
We are taking on more risk. And Joelle was exactly right. The specific buses involved in performing the service would operate as a commercial carrier. And so then that layer of regulation goes on those buses and those drivers.
They would need to be, go through an entirely additional set of review with the highway patrol. They'd need another minimum of 1 inspection, additional inspection a year. And it's different than the inspection they do now. And they will have to be done by 2 different groups. They can do it concurrently, but you have to have 2 separate people on board performing the inspection.
And would we be creating a separate class of driver too? I mean, I assume we wouldn't want all of our drivers to be DOT.
Correct. They would be, covered by the FMCSA and the DOT, yeah.
So let's just say we took 10 of our drivers and trained them this way, and then if we ended up not having any of them available on a day that somebody wanted to use our buses, then we're kind of jammed again, right? I mean, so you'd have to train a fairly large number.
Well, it sounds like that area is probably the area of challenge where, because we wouldn't want to mandate that bus drivers have to take this extra physical. Some of them may not be able to pass it anyway, and so then, you could do it voluntarily, but then you don't know how many are going to volunteer and how many are going to pass it, and so we may have a constraint on being able to, assuming we agree to do the bus inspections so that they can be used for non-routine use. Then the other choke point would be drivers. Do you have enough drivers who took the physical and passed it and are willing to do the extra driving?
And billing and invoicing, it would have to be very, very transparent. There couldn't be any, that would be a challenge.
I mean, if it was the wish of the board to continue to provide these services, as you know, we're always posting and looking for bus drivers, moving forward, it could be a condition of employment if that is something that, the board would want to do, to say, in order for you to be eligible to be a bus driver, that you agree to go through these things. And so voluntary for our current drivers, but certainly could change the way we post for that position in the future.
Could there be any labor issues?
Potentially.
Like who gets to train and who doesn't, who gets the special? Yeah.
And if they're knocked off their physical because of their DOT,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
And is the testing different from what our drivers have to go through now if you're DOT?
Not really, no.
Everything else
It's
is-
primarily the
okay.
physical and then the bus itself.
Okay.
yeah.
So who would be the groups affected by this, other than, it sounds like the city of Brecksville on Sunday with their boo
So
out, but
we
who
have a
else
couple
is affected?
parochial schools that have used service before. The cities have used service before. The Kiwanis have used service before. The Montessori school has used service before.
Would they have the option of maybe, I mean, if we give them this advance notice that we won't be doing this next year, do they have the option of maybe coming up with their own I mean, is there a way to like meet them in the middle, or is it just, we're not going to do it, sorry?
We wouldn't be able to support the service. If we chose not to support the service, it would be, it's kind of an all or nothing.
Okay.
But we could still offer it, but then, but make the extra physical voluntary for the drivers we currently have. And whoever takes it and passes it, that becomes our pool of eligible drivers. And so when somebody has a request, it would be contingent on having available drivers that are.
And a vehicle.
And a
vehicle
vehicle.
that needs a special license plate.
Right.
It needs a license plate covered by the PUCO.
Is there, I'm sorry, but is there any talk about working with the state legislature to clean this up? It sounds like it's like a new unfunded mandate
There
to
we
some
go.
degree.
Are you volunteering, Mr. Dawson? No.
Sure, we'll
Yeah,
be down in
yeah,
Columbus
that-
in a few
that's
weeks,
right,
so.
that's
We
right.
have an opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's, the interpretation came down not realizing how much this impacts individual communities, because, these are our community groups, these are our community members, and so, with that interpretation, I don't think they thought it would have as much of an impact as it's actually having. As a matter of fact, when Chris called to check on the insurance companies aren't even aware that there is this new kind of interpretation of the, so it's amazing to see what'll happen. I think if some other school districts who also provide the level of service we do start talking about this and saying this is going to pose a real problem for our community members because they count on this transportation, it might get looked at again. It's just like anything else. The more people that are going to have issues with it, it'll take notice for sure.
Is there an opportunity for a waiver of some sort, much the way we have done with kindergarten or something like that?
So there is a waiver. So the Kiwanis completed a waiver, and they provide a certificate of insurance already to have the service. So say Basil's or any of the parochial schools or any of the cities are required to provide that now.
Okay. And how long can that go on for?
The waiver and certificate of insurance, the waiver needs to be signed each occurrence. The
Okay.
certificate of insurance is good for a year.
Okay. All right.
I don't think any decision needs to be made, but
No.
just so you're aware and you can kind of process.
As long as
and-
the waiver card is still available, then it sounds like we need to have that on the radar. It sounds like, I like your plan, your idea where it's voluntary, and then going forward, just being proactive that way, that seems like the best methodology. Do you think that that's gonna hinder us from attracting bus drivers? No? No. It's the same thing, basically, so, okay. As long as that doesn't hinder, I mean, that seems like a good practice.
There's that question of, like if one of the parochial schools has our district kids in it, it's primarily, so, personally, I would love to be able to provide transportation to them specifically.
Right.
That's really a tough thing to have to turn away from that. So
Yeah.
maybe with some further legal opinion and, some changes, with you're saying the overreach of that law, we would be able to do something like that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Certified sub-discussion.
I think we're gonna talk about, here comes the bus app
Oh, sorry, here
update
comes
first.
the bus app part.
So I'm gonna call on Heidi to give an update as to kind of where we are with that.
Sure, Here Comes the Bus is the app that runs in conjunction with GPS. Talked to Synovia and TransFinder, our routing company. They're very pleased with our progress. It's generally a 6-month wait time, 6-month integration, and that's when school is running. We put it in just before summer, so we really are ahead of the game. Looks like in a few weeks we'll be able to get that thing rolled out. Haven't met any new dilemmas with that. Our beta testing is going great. People are pleased with it. We have administrators, we have parents, we have a variety of people on it. I'm on it with my nephews. I'm tickled pink with the information that we can derive from it, and so it looks like we're ready to go. And it is an app, it's an app that they have to download.
Right.
And it's fairly, people are doing it with just the instructions that are
So Heidi, can you just give us a quick recap of what Here Comes the Bus is?
Sure.
It's a GPS system, we
Sure.
purchased it for how many buses, and then
Okay.
it's helping our customer service, so.
Yes,
yeah.
it is, and so that's significant. Chris can say we just installed our last 5 units on the buses this last week. Every unit is up, and so what it is so we have, it's a multi-layered data integration, and it's a very complicated thing. So you have your routing system, which tells you how your buses are going, how they're getting there, what time they're getting there, and everything. Okay, that's why when parents will call in, what time's my bus? So that's that. Then Chris purchased, with your behest, all the GPS units that were installed on the bus that now have to, so they're there, they're telling us where that bus is going, which is great, right? But now it had to tell us where the bus is going with routing information, okay? And we rerouted the entire district this summer and changed school times, which is amazing that we
Right.
got to this point. So here we are, looks like the data's going well with this, it's meshing with the GPS, and now we have that app that is the third layer that the parents get to see. And that app will in turn tell you where your bus is, you can follow it on its route, and when it gets to the school, it turns green, so you know that your child has been, delivered, the bus is there. And it also tells you when your bus is coming, like Mason Masich's bus has entered the stop zone, it will be there momentarily. Then it'll say Mason Masich's bus has exited the stop zone and is en route to the school. So,
Wow, that'll be wonderful.
yeah, it's great.
Yeah. That'll really alleviate worry with a lot of parents, I think, when the buses are late, and it'll kind of cut down that other communication. Does it send you an alert if the bus is running late? Does it push something out like that, or is it basically something that the parent has to monitor?
Well, we're working on that piece of it yet, all the alerts and things. The
Okay.
schools, what's gonna be fantastic is the schools shortly we're gonna set up user groups at the schools. So the great thing is the schools are gonna be able to tell you, or tell when their buses are going to get here. Like they'll be able to see, bus 52, that's our last bus into
So nobody's
Highland.
standing outside with a megaphone?
Yeah,
and
we're
going to
expecting
say
that,
something?
they can look either on their phone or the
Okay.
office, and they'll say, gee, that bus is almost here. So that for school planning and lining kids up is gonna be just, it's gonna be, if everybody
Right.
uses it as it's intended, it's gonna be wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we looking for mid-November,
Yes,
end of November?
yes, yes.
Okay.
Mid-November?
We feel good about that, because see, this rerouting, the data piece was challenging, and we had to build a server and everything. This was a big project, and it's all coming together beautifully.
Well, thank you to
That's
you and your
terrific,
team, for
yeah.
sure. And keep us in the loop and let us know once
It's been fun.
full.
It's really been fun. We're using it in the office already.
Oh,
It's kind
good.
of like, yeah.
Good. Well, I can't wait to hear what the parents say
Thanks.
about it after we have it full blown rolled out. Okay, thank you very much. Item D, certified sub discussion.
Yes, so yet another discussion. We've noticed this year specifically that our sub fill rate has dropped already. Last year we had an average of about 96% fill rate. We're down to about 94 right now, which is concerning. This is a problem statewide. There's not a lot of certified subs out there, and the economy is great, so people are getting jobs, and so there's not a lot of people who need work. So it's this complex problem. We did some local research to see where our sub rates fall in the context of some other districts from the local area. As you can see from the chart that we provided you, our sub rate is the lowest in the area of those comparative school districts. So this is a two-pronged conversation. We'd like, from the board, we'd like to raise our rates. I had given you a suggestion of raising our rate from $80 a day to $95 a day, which aligns us with North Royalton. What we've also seen on another chart that you have there is that many of the districts will have a set rate for like the first 30 days that a sub is in, and then they raise it maybe another $10 or an additional amount for any day after starting on day 31 that they're in the same assignment. And so that is another consideration if that's something we want to do. We know that a couple of our neighboring districts do that on that 31st day, like Revere, they will raise their rate at that time. The other information that we gave you, we started a conversation about looking at hiring permanent building subs, And the need for that would be that if we had these permanent building subs that we employed already, we would know that we would have at least 5 of our positions filled. What we're seeing right now is that we struggle to find subs for half-day assignments. We struggle to find subs for period subbing at the middle school and at the high school level. So if a teacher needs to leave for a meeting, the cost on that is about $60,000 a year to us. So we provided you some information that you can see on a calendar on a day-to-day basis how many subs we have in the district on any given day, and we ran this for last year. So by hiring 5 permanent building subs, we're already paying for that anyways, because on any given day, except for I think there was 3 days during the school year last year, we had 2 subs one day, 3 subs another day, and I think the last day we had 3 days. But every other day in between, we had more than 5 subs. So the permanent subs that we're asking for to put in place for the rest of this year would be, it would be a cost that we're already incurring anyways. It would just guarantee us that we would have some people available to cover these, harder to fill positions. So we gave you some data for the year on that and what that looked like. So this is kind of like a 3-pronged discussion. One would be, talking about looking at our rates, and if you'd be willing to raise that. It's not something that you need to vote on. I just need direction because we contract our subs through Renhill. So it's just, we would have to approve another memorandum of understanding with them just to increase that cost, which can be done at a later board meeting. And then the second piece of that is, the consideration of posting for these permanent building subs to ensure that we can at least have some subs to cover these harder to fill positions that we have that come out throughout the year.
So we had a discussion in pre-agenda meeting, and I can, and we were talking, the use of a building sub is pretty standard.
It is. You have some data there on other districts in our area that are using it as well.
In education, and it's very helpful from a planning standpoint. I can say, like, tomorrow I'm writing WEPs, and the building sub will be, subbing for me as well. It's just a lot easier, and it is becoming more difficult. Plus, if things arise, it's just a lot easier with behavior problems that may happen at the school. So I really hope that we would consider this building sub idea. It's just helpful to the flow of the educational instruction.
I think it makes sense. I would also, though, just say for $5 a day, if Independence and Revere, who I would think would be our North Royalton too,
Sure.
but at $100, we'd be the same as them. And, I mean,
Yeah,
I agree. We've been at $80 for quite a while.
we have.
And the subs teachers that I talk to don't understand why. With Independence paying 100 and Revere paying 100, why we're as low as we are.
Lawrence is well over 100, and that was about 6 years ago, so. I mean, and.
If you're comfortable with 100, I'm comfortable with 100.
Well, people do make decisions. They
Sure.
are making decisions. They are not going necessarily here. I mean, I know our kids are stellar, but the thing is you're also talking about 2 other districts where the kids are stellar
Right.
as well. So if given the opportunity, $20,
Well, we've been there for
that's
so
a big
long.
difference.
I mean, I'm just
So.
concerned that if we go to 95,
Sure.
we've only got 5 districts that are in that range. Everybody else is above that.
Sure.
And how long have they been there?
Yep.
So,
Well, my thinking is that one of the reasons why we're still at 80 is because, up until recently, that's been enough to attract subs to fill our needs, and now we're finding that it's not. So, why go higher than you need to? We can always go to 95, come back 6 months later and find out we're still missing, let's take it up another notch, rather than jump, all the way up. I would tend to go more with the suggestion that 95 is probably the area where we match North Royalton, and then we can always go higher if we need to. I like the idea of maybe stepping it up after 30 days. I don't know what's your take on that? It seems like you get a little more commitment from somebody to stay with you because
Sure.
they're going to get a bump.
And that happens quite often, if you're in a long-term sub position. So if you have a teacher that goes out on maternity leave or on a long-term medical leave, there's provisions in the law that at 60 days, it jumps to a different level. But that time between 30 days and 60 days to have somebody, make a little bit more money because they are more committed. By that time, if they're here 30 days, they might be doing grades and report cards, where somebody who's in a day-to-day assignment might not necessarily do those things. So they are, having additional responsibilities where that would be appropriate to maybe have us, just kind of stagger that rate. So if you started at 95 and then 31, it went up to 115, and then it's going to go to something else on day 61 anyways. So if that's the way you want to, we can tailor it that way as well, so.
I certainly like the idea of going up, stepping up after 30 or 31 days. Because like you said, they're required to do more, so.
Yeah, I do as well.
So what would you?
I'd be good at going 90 to start and then 95 after day 31. If you think that another increase makes sense after that, I guess share your thoughts with us. I don't know, because I'm assuming that once a sub has been around for that long, they also understand that another 30 days they become, they cross another threshold.
It's just 90 is so, it's still out of whack with who's around us, and the disruption, our teachers end up filling those subtimes when we don't get subs. So we end up paying that way as well, because we paid the teachers hourly for filling in. It's, I don't know what it is,
Right, but
$25 an hour.
It depends on their daily rates, yeah.
So, and I understand what you're saying, but I'd rather just be attracting them right off the bat. with
Right, but the other
95.
piece of this which complements it is if we're gonna go with 5 permanent subs in essence that we commit to, we also now have backfilled and we have a stable base, because we're saying we're gonna have kind of like permanent, I don't know, permanent's not the right word.
Right.
You'll lead into those immediately. I mean,
Sure.
it's a daily occurrence where you're using those subs, just because that's the first person who's hit in the sub list.
Sure.
So I understand that feels secure, but I see it immediately the first hit, and then you still don't have the problem where you need to fill those other positions. So it does bring relief. It's more from a familiarity standpoint, in my opinion. Also, the kids are very familiar with that sub, and that's just amazing. The teachers are as well. So I like it from the educational standpoint.
Sure.
I'm not sure it's going to alleviate the problem of attracting subs, because I see every day that subs
Sure. I mean, I think the rate increase will
PD or whatever.
increase, but it does provide us the flexibility then to move people around too. So if you can't get a period sub and we have to move somebody, sometimes it's easier to get a full day sub if you know you have a full day assignment, and kind of be able to have that flexibility to move those people in those harder positions that's harder to fill, because half days are really hard to fill, period subs are really hard to fill, at the high school. So to have that, to have 5 people that we can have that flexibility to move them and then, fill appropriately would be ideal. But it's
So, yeah, to that point, I would rather start where I can attract more and at least be more in line with everybody else. So the $95 to me, I'd like to start there, because those two things are two separate issues, the way
Sure.
I see it play out during the day.
Well, and I know this is probably exceedingly difficult to measure, but I mean, do you feel like you get a better quality sub if you have a permanent building sub, and 2, if we're paying more money?
Well, the money part of it, sure. I mean, if you've got districts that are paying $120 and some of your subs are saying, I'm going to drive out there for $120, yeah, you could. We also have people who are very loyal to us, former retired teachers that come back and they just want to sub here just for something to do. So I don't know if the money necessarily, but if we're not getting our fill rate, which is more concerning to me, because our rates are low, because they can go somewhere else and make more money, that's the issue. The permanent building sub, the other positive of that is that it gives our administrators and our staff a chance to really get to know somebody, and so that if there is an opening the following year or there is a retirement, you've seen somebody work on a day-to-day basis who's already built relationships with kids, who's already built relationships with staff and with a principal, and that's really important too when you're looking for good people to fill those positions.
I'll go with the 95 recommendation.
So,
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Do you want us to step it up at 31 days and go
Yes.
up another
Yeah.
$10?
That sounds like a great
Yes.
idea, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Okay with us posting on the building subs?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
All right, item 11, superintendent's consent agenda. We have A, certified recommendations, B, classified recommendations, C, supplemental recommendations, D, approval of Superintendent's consent agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
Any questions on any of the recommendations?
All right. Roll call?
Mr. Dosen,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack.
Yes. Item 12, Superintendent's other business. A, out-of-state trip robotics for 12-13-19 to 12-15-19. Item B, Brooksville Broadview Heights baseball trip to Southeastern Baseball Classic for 4/13/20 to 4/17/20. Item C, project search agreement. D, ESC agreement, audiology and hearing impairment. E, ESC agreement, achievement centers for children. F, administrative and supervisor compensation schedule. G, approval of superintendent's other business. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions on items A through F?
No? Roll call?
Mr. Dosen,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack.
Yes. Item 13, Treasurer's Consent Agenda. We have A, Financial Report, September 2019. B, 5-year forecast, October 2019. C, JP Morgan Chase Depository Agreement. D, approval to set up new funds. E, minutes of the September 24th, 19 and October 3rd, 19 meeting. F, approval of Treasurer's Consent Agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Madam President, we probably should wait to have roll call, because
Of
you
course.
probably should hear the presentation first.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. But thank you.
Who moved on that one?
I did.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Who seconded it? Mr. Dosen?
Just make it up.
We need a minute to set it up.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You ready?
We're ready.
Hey, we're ready.
Yeah, for sure.
We had a forecast 5-year. Mike Sobel, he's a senior analytical advisor, and he's going to be making a presentation tonight on the 5-year forecast. He was here last year, and I think he has better information about this district than I do since I just got here, and I'm sure he would do a lot better job.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. I've been working with the district now for a couple of years on the 5-year forecast. I'm just going to go through a brief presentation on where you are right now and key assumptions that are in there. If you have questions, please ask as I'm going along. You don't need to wait till the end to do that on anything I'm going to go through. Let's go ahead and start with the forecast as it is now compared to where it was back in May. You'll see now at fiscal 23, the forecast shows a cash balance that's about $3 million, $3.2 million lower than it was back in the May forecast. The main driver of that was spending last year ended up about $465,000 above where it was expected to be at the end of the forecast. You multiply that by 5 because it carries through each year, and that's 2.3 of the $3.3 million. The other big piece of it, which was referred to earlier with the school bus purchase, that was another $460,000 that was not in the May forecast. So those two things together, about 2.7 of the $3.3 million change. Everything else is fairly small. $600,000 in over a $50 million budget is a fairly small movement. Taking a look at the comparison of revenues this is for fiscal year 20 from the May forecast to now. You'll see very little difference in the revenue forecast for fiscal 20. Only the other revenue is higher by a significant amount, and it's a couple $100,000 higher than it was in May. The rest of the revenue forecasts are, for the most part, rounding error from where they were at the May forecast. On the expenditure side, you see small increases above, for fiscal 20. Most of this is driven by the higher base from the higher final spending in fiscal year 2019. You see the big jump in capital outlay. Again, that's the bus purchase that's causing that big jump from May. And then you've just got a little bit of growth in each of the other areas. The biggest one is purchase services, and I'll show you a little bit later on where most of that is coming from. Taking a quick look at enrollment. This is as of the end of fiscal year 19. What you can see is from 2014 through 2019, the district lost about 200 students. The highlighted line that's on there, line 4, that is a new measurement. It's not really a new measurement, it's been around, but it's now being used for funding. That's where the wellness funds are based on, and if you were following the Cup-Patterson work that was going on, it's the same definition of students was used in Cup-Patterson. It's actually measuring who is being educated in the district, not just who lives here but could be going to school, whether it's here, whether it's a community school, whether they're open enrolling. The other pieces on there just give you an idea of some of the changes. Your percentage of students in economic disadvantagement jumped quite a bit from 14 to 15, but has remained kind of stable in an 11 to 12% range over the period. Your special ed student counts have slowly declined over the last 5 years, but not significantly. Not a big decline there.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
just that, Joel, maybe you can answer this, but I recall when you're looking at enrollment, there's kind of two numbers. One is how many people are educated in your district, and then kind of how many students are in the seats, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a different term for that.
Yeah.
But, so which one is this? Is this total educated in our district, or is this students in seats?
There's about 5 or 6 different measures of enrollment, which makes life fun. But the line 4, which is the highlighted one, those are essentially butts in seats.
Okay.
Those are students actually being educated. Line 1, which is formula ADM, that was what the base funding used to be based on, and that's more of a district residence measure. So it's if they live in the district, if they're going to a public school. Remember, a charter school is a public school. Whether it's a charter school, whether they're open enrolling to a neighbor, whether they're coming here, whether they've been court placed somewhere else, those students are all in formula ADM, as well as kids going to a JVS. Those are all in ADM. Number 4, which is total district educated ADM, that is literally who you are educating on a daily basis.
So why are those two numbers the same under 19, 1 and 4?
That you basically, what it means is you don't have very many kids leaving, or they're not quite. They are. That's actually about as close as I've ever seen that number in a district, where they're off about a half kid from each other. What that means is you've got an equal number of kids coming in, whether they're being court placed in or a grant, however they're getting here, as you have that are going out.
So we may be picking up some as well.
You're probably, this district, you lose almost none to open enrollment. You have a handful going to charter schools. And so you've probably got some being placed here by court order, grandparent power of attorney type things. And you're bringing in about the same number as you have leaving.
Does that include preschool?
This should not include preschool.
Okay.
This should only be K-12.
Yeah, it's a little disconnect from what we have, but our numbers include preschool when we say.
Yeah, because this is all based fund, this is all driving based funding, if preschool's outside of this funding.
Just a small question, so if a student's paying tuition to come here, so are they counted in this number as well?
If the parent is paying tuition,
Yeah.
then they are considered a resident student, even if they're outside. And you don't have open enrollment, do you? Or
No.
if you were open enrolling into the district, they would not be in 1 because they'd be showing where they were
Right.
coming from. They would be in 4. But if they're actually paying tuition to come here, then they are in both, because they are considered a resident student if they are paying tuition.
Okay.
Any other questions as far as that? Okay. We'll do a brief overview of revenue and expenditures. The revenue overview. Over the prior 5 years, you had an average annual growth rate of about 2.3% in your operating revenue. The big driver of that was the levy you passed a couple years ago. The forecast for the current period going forward is about half of the rate from before, about 1.2%. And again, there's no levy in there to boost the growth in the revenue. If you take a look at the sources, you really only gain revenue from two sources: real estate and public utility. Public utility growth has been fairly healthy around the state, and so that's driving some of your increase there. Remember, when public utility values go up, you get that dollar for dollar, because there's no rollback of rates for public utility. The real estate is a combination of new construction in commercial and in housing, and also when you go through your triennial update in 2021, you'll get a little bit of boost on your inside millage from the growth and values of the triennial update. And so that's what's driving those. If we take a look at the valuations in the district, key things to point out: if you look at 2018, you see about a $79 million increase in residential values, which is almost 10%. That was the reappraisal in Cuyahoga County. And you also had a very healthy $11.7 million increase in your commercial values, about 6.5%. 2021 will be a triennial year. What we're looking at there is, at this point, a 2.8% increase in residential. The way the housing market's been, that may be a little bit conservative, but because you're not a 20 mil floor district, if it ends up 6-7%, that additional valuation is not going to drive much revenue, where it would make a noticeable difference to the forecast. If you look at the right side of this is your new construction. This is where you do gain revenue from all of this. Your residential new construction is forecasted at about 0.4% per year. It's a tiny bit lower than you've seen the last couple of years. If that does a little bit better, you will get more money on that. But again, it's on $1 million of value. You're not, you might be looking at $30,000-$40,000 of additional revenue. With about 0.8% increase in your class 2, your business new construction through the period, and then public utilities assumed to be around 2.5. You do see a 4.6 number in there for 2019. Those are preliminary values that we do have already for 2019. That came out a couple weeks ago, so it's a little bit higher. But you can see your change hasn't been that high, so the 2.5 is more in line. Questions about the valuation? Okay, the new Student Wellness Aid Program. This is a program as part of House Bill 166, the biennial budget. Every district is getting Student Wellness Aid. It is based on the poverty rate in the district, and this is a different measure of poverty than if you've looked at poverty rates by economic disadvantagement students, which is measured by free and reduced lunch. This is a completely different measure. This is using the Census Bureau's American Community Survey, and it is the percentage of children under the age of 18 who are in poverty relative to the total number of children under the age of 18. And actually, it's 185% of the poverty rate is the threshold for this. The one thing you keep in mind with this, this is probably not an issue for you. That's probably a fairly representative poverty rate for Brecksville. But it is, because it's on survey, there are some inconsistencies in the data, and there are places where you're getting results that we wouldn't really expect. that's probably pretty reasonable for this community though. So the poverty rates are broken into quintiles. Everyone is ranked from highest poverty to lowest, broken into quintiles. You are in quintile 5, which is the lowest quintile. And in quintile 5, there's a sliding scale of the amount of money you get per pupil that's based on both your quintile and where you fall in the quintile. And the way it works out is $37 a student in fiscal 20 and about $53 a student that you'll get in fiscal 21. And that is now multiplied by, remember, line 4 that was on the previous enrollment graph, line 4 for the year, and that's your revenue. So what we're projecting is about $136,000 this year, $193,000 next year. That money is deposited into a different fund that does not go into the operating budget, and it is not supposed to be reflected in the 5-year forecast. What you as a district will need to decide is whether you are going to supplant existing expenditures and move them to Fund 467, or whether you are going to do new programming. And if you do new programming, then when you get to fiscal year 2022, what are you going to assume happens to that new spending? The forecast right now assumes that the full $193,000 is new programming, and that programming will revert to the general fund in fiscal year 22, with the assumption that the economic or the student wellness money goes away. If the wellness money stays, you can continue that out in 467, and you won't have that impact. It's also a possibility that that money could get rolled into some type of a general level of guarantee in the operating budget, and so the money comes. I mean, we just don't quite know what's gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's
Some
okay.
of that is a little bit hard to understand. So we don't have to use this money for.
You do have to use them. There's 11 purposes that are in the law for what you can use the money for.
Okay.
But what you can do is say you have psychologists. Okay, psychologists probably fit in the definition of one of the 11 categories. And if you're not paying those psychologists out of federal money, you're paying them out of your general fund, you can move those psychologists over to Fund 467 and use this money to now pay their salaries for 2 years, which would
Free up
money in the general
Okay.
fund.
Okay, thank you.
So to clarify, because of this new legislation, we're getting, $136,000 in FY20 and another $193 in 2021, and we're going to use that for to supplement some of our new programming, the screening and
Yes.
the mental health action plan. So we already had planned, but this funding is going to help fund that. And then after FY 2021, if the state doesn't see fit to continue the funding and we don't get any more dollars after that, and we want to keep in place all the programs that we have, we then have to self-fund $193,000 if that's our spending level. And what you're saying is you put into this forecast in the out years 2022, 3, and 4, an extra $193 hit, $193,000 expenditure against our general fund.
That is correct.
Because we are assuming we'll self-fund if the state doesn't provide the
That
funding.
is the assumption that is in here. Again, it's just the assumption that's in
Right.
here. It's not
Right. It's a forecast, and so it's an
Yeah.
assumption.
It's
You
an
could make the assumption that we would stop the programming and not
You
spend the
can- that's correct.
$193,000.
Or you can make the assumption that the money will continue, and you'll be able to continue funding it out in fund.
But-
At this point, it's a matter of pick your.
Well, and so for us, since we started this plan last year, we already have been self-funding. So
Yes,
this is a
right.
great opportunity for us to supplant some of this money for things that we were already paying for anyways. And then we have some new ideas and some new programming to use the rest of this money for, but all tied to our mental health plan. So we talked about providing these parent nights and information nights, and some of that money will be used to pay for those things. So we'll have that for the next 2 years. So we're gonna do a combination of
Right.
both, supplant and then use it for some new programming.
But the mental health action plan, do we have, how far out did we plan that? Are we 5 years out in that? I mean, I know we were gonna start it and then see what our results are, so I don't know, we didn't commit to 5 years
We did not
out,
commit to
right?
5 years. I think our plan currently, all of the way our update has gone, we'll have most of it complete in 3. So we'll have to sit down next year
Right.
anyways and figure out what that's gonna look like moving forward.
Right.
I mean, a lot of that initiative was that PAX training, wasn't it? Like, that wasn't major, but it was to get ready to go to the new school and get this common language, right? And get things moving in that direction. So, I mean, that's the 3-year runway. We're not paying for the new social service program through this, are we? Or is it Guidestones that we brought in? No? No, that's just something that we brought in, that's a service, okay. Okay, so we haven't put actual bodies that we, like, we're not paying for, are we paying for counselors? Is this part?
We were not, for the
Program.
concern that was brought up by Mike, we were not going to use this money to pay for personnel because then
Right.
you'd have
Because
to
it could be
continue.
gone.
It could be gone. And so
Okay.
we didn't want to commit. Now, some other districts that received a lot more money than we did based on their, are committing to personnel, to have social workers and other services, medical providers to come into their districts to provide service for kids. We're not in that situation where we would need that level of support for wellness, so we're going to use it for the programming and the mental health things that we are already doing in this district.
Okay. Sounds like a good plan.
Good.
Any other questions? Just so the rest of state aid, the way the law is set up, the formula that was in existence has not been repealed. It has been suspended for 2 years. And so you are getting the exact same amount of money in base aid in 20 and 21 as you got in 19. It is an identical amount of money. The presumption is, and John, if you want to move ahead.
I'm sorry.
Actually, going back a minute. I didn't have a slide. I was going to explain this and didn't have a slide. If you start looking ahead to fiscal 22, you were a district that was 50% on the guarantee prior to under the old formula. Usually when you see a district that far on the guarantee, the chances are it is a district that is going to stay on the guarantee if a new funding formula comes in. And so there's no other growth built in state aid. It's the assumption that even if a formula comes back in 2022, you will continue to be a guaranteed district. Okay, expenditure overview. Overall, looking back, you had a little over 1.1% increase annually in expenditures over the previous 5 years. A lot of what that is essentially your salaries were flat for that 5-year period. It's only 0.2% annual growth. I assume we went through some reductions a couple years ago, I think. That causes that one across 5 years to flatten that out. The assumption going forward is for about 4% annual growth in expenditures. Most of that growth is coming in the top 3 categories. Salaries at about 3%, benefits at 7%, purchase services at about 5%. You see a rather large number in the capital. That's because of the bus purchase this year spread out over a 5-year average, so it kind of distorts that percentage. You can see next year there's a 74% drop in capital assumed. So that's assumed only as a one-time expenditure. So that is the overview of the expenses for the next 5 years. If we take a look first at salaries and the salary assumptions, last year your net salary growth was about 2.5%, which will be a combination of base increases, step increases. I know you have a lot of shifting going on because of your new salary schedules, and also savings from some attrition from higher folks leaving and lower ones coming on. This year and next year, the assumption is for 3.5% growth, percent higher. And again, that's the same 3 factors. If we look at where you are through September, you're at about 3% growth through the first quarter, but September alone was 4% growth, and that's usually the first month where you have an apples-to-apples comparison with the year before because of the contract turnover and raises and things like that. And so 3.5 seems like a reasonable range for where your spending is right now. The last 3 years of the forecast it's assuming 3%.
Do we have, I don't recall, and do you know what we have dialed into the forecast for FY 2022 when our new school will be opening and we will be offlining 3 buildings and we're going to have cost savings associated with that?
Those are not built into the forecast yet.
Okay.
The potential changes from the buildings that are not built in.
Okay.
That's something that, I had not, gotten any kind of estimates from Jeff as far as those. If you have working estimates, it's something, we can sit down and talk about and try and work them into the May forecast.
Okay.
Because that's quite significant, because we were projecting some significant savings
Yes.
once we move
Yep.
into the new building. I know those savings are going to be delayed a year because we originally thought we could get in 2 years and now it's going to be 3.
Yeah. But I can work with Joel and then whoever you're.
Yeah, we had some estimates that we had drawn up, and so, yeah, I can give them to you, and they would be effective fiscal year 23, correct? Because the 21-22 school year is fiscal year 22, so if we're opening the year.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure I can
Okay.
put them in the right
Right.
spot.
Yeah, we can work those into the May forecast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Benefit assumptions, medical expenses. Last year you had a 9% increase in medical, 7% increase in prescription. This year, both are right around 10%. And the 10% is the assumption each year going forward, which is about a market movement. Most treasurers, when they're doing forecasts, will forecast anywhere from 8 to 12 is usually what is forecast.
And this goes away with Medicare for all, right?
No, it's your actual cost that gets affected.
I haven't built that. I did not. I thought about building it. But
Did you?
No.
Maybe wait a little, see how things
Maybe
shake
we'll
out.
wait till May to do that.
Yeah.
Purchase services. I just wanted to point out a couple of areas of purchase services. If you see, these are all in what are called the 470 object codes. These are all payments for students who are leaving the district to be educated elsewhere, whether it's charter school, whether it's going, special ed tuition where they're being, placed in specific facilities, maybe through the ESC, if you have them through there or wherever. And what you can see is, and we see this all the time, you look at those growth rates, and this is in a lot of places is the fastest growing lines in the budget. And they are lines that you have no control over. They are what they are. And you can see, the special ed tuition, you had a 25% increase from 17 to 18, then a 39% increase from 18 to 19. And that will also include the Peterson scholarships, and the autism scholarships would be in the 475 object code. So that's where we see a lot of that being driven, is through those scholarship programs. You see the other tuition outside districts, you have had 32%, 25%. We're projecting almost 20% this year, based on where you already are through 3 months. And so they're really fast growing line items. They add up real fast, and there's just nothing you can do about it.
Well, I mean, we could do something about it, because some of those, if they are children that are on 504s or IEPs and they're, demanding or requesting services that they feel that we can't provide. I mean, these are some of those settlement agreements
Right.
to not go through a due process, which those costs would look much higher had we gone through due process. So some of that is, I don't want them to think that it's not in our control, but some of it is part of those settlement agreements that are way cheaper than if we were to fight this in court and, incur $1 million in legal fees to fight something that we could end up losing anyways. So sometimes it's just
What it is.
it's what it is.
Okay, so the key takeaways, your district, beginning with next school year, is going to be spending more than it's taking in. Mr. Dosen kind of talked about that kind of early on with the front loading of levies and then the spending. The fund balance, which is expected to peak about $19 million next year, 36% of annual spending, which is very healthy. By the end of the 5-year forecast, is down to 13% of annual spending, which is okay, not ideally where you want to be, but okay. And just to give you an idea, if we look ahead to the 2021 school year, the operating deficit, should you decide to make that up just through a levy, is the equivalent of about a 1.65 mil levy. By the end of the forecast period, that's 4.8 mil. So essentially, you'll be spending more than you're taking in by the equivalent of a 4.8 mil levy. So that is all I had to go through as an overview. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
I just want to, I appreciate, you stepping in and helping us out here. And these are some very good charts and very good information that's presented in a way. It's a little different than the format we usually put it in, but it's easy to
Pretty
follow.
effective.
Yeah.
No, I like it.
Actually, there was
Nice
information in here that was different, and
How
I
it was
appreciate
presented,
it,
yeah.
because of, of how it lays out. So, and you mentioned that these come out of the forecast.
This is all out of the this all comes out of the software that we use.
Okay.
Every one of these graphics I copied and pasted out of the forecast file.
And we have the same we have the same PFR.
You have the exact
software.
you have the exact same files.
Okay. So from a board standpoint, when we find our permanent treasurer, we may want to talk about what the 5-year forecast looks like. Some of this information I think would be good to maybe just keep the whole thing. But
yeah, this is essentially the format I used when I was a treasurer.
Okay.
This is what I presented to this is basically how I presented it to my board.
Would you like to be a treasurer again?
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
I am happily semi-retired.
But you don't know.
John said the same thing,
You don't know, you would love it here so much.
Mark, did you want to ask him anything about the financial statement?
What was that?
So you want to explain what we've done to the financial statement, that it's more easier for them to read?
Okay.
Talking about the monthly financial.
We've been kind of revamping the our monthly financials. I think what we have now is easier than what we had before. It's a little bit more intuitive. I sent that to you.
Yeah, I'm going to send it to the board.
Yeah, I sent it to you last night.
Right.
For this morning. Yeah, I sent it to you. So, but that, and again, that monthly financial statement is built into the software. Basically, we put it in, it spits it out. We can add text to it. It's something that we have found that most districts, it gives the boards what they need at a decision-making level for what they need. Again, I use that with my board. I've only not been a treasurer now for 4 months.
See, it's still so fresh for you.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing those numbers when we start offlining as they start impacting this forecast. That'll be something to look forward to. Another thing, have you seen a lot of districts do that upside downside? We used to have that where it's the upside of the forecast, and it's like if this happens, then this, the forecast goes this way.
That's usually.
Am I saying that right?
It's a sensitivity
Yeah.
analysis.
It's a sensitivity.
And that, I did not include anything
Okay.
like that. Part of the issues with where you see more of that tends to be on the revenue side.
Okay.
And frankly, you don't have, because you're not going to be getting more state funding. There's no combination of things that are going to happen most likely that's going to cause you to start getting state funding. I mean, you could theoretically.
There's more down than up is what you're saying.
Theoretically, your risk on state funding is that the guarantee is no longer the prior year, but usually that's going to, I think it's going to be tied to one of two things. It's going to be tied to either enrollment loss, which you had seen for a few years, but now for a couple of years you've not.
Okay.
Or it's going to be tied to all the additional pipeline value that has been coming into the state, and no pipelines in Cuyahoga County, so that's not an issue up here anyway. So, that would be the only risk you have in state funding, other than around, the wellness aid, but that's not a very big chunk of money. That's not gonna make or break the forecast. As far as, your property tax is obviously your biggest source of revenue. Because you're not at the 20 mil floor, the reappraisal is not gonna make that much difference. It doesn't matter if it's 10% higher than what's being forecast, because you're only gonna get new revenue on your inside millage, so that can't really make or break the forecast. I guess if you knew of some big new development, commercial development, that has the ability to boost some revenue.
We've had issues with collection rates. in the
Your
past,
collection rates are close to 100%.
We've been
Well,
up,
they are
yeah.
now.
They are now.
After the
We did,
recession.
we did a
Well,
little.
it was everyone,
They did,
yeah, it was with
yeah.
everyone back then.
But Mike, can you make some comments? We have some that, people on the board, some of us have been here more years than others, and some of the terminology can get hard to follow. So can you give a brief explanation of inside millage versus outside
Sure.
millage and the 20 mil floor?
Sure. Inside millage is the millage that was allocated to the district in the 1930s. I can't remember what yours is off the top of my head. I know I saw it. Usually, most districts are in a 4 to 6 mil range.
I think it's 5.
It may be. So what that means is that on those inside mills, when valuation changes in either direction for whatever reason, you gain or lose revenue. So even at a reappraisal, if you got, you had a 10% increase in values on residential, you got 10% more money on those 5 mills. Everything else is outside millage, which means it has to be voted on by law. Outside millage, you are not, for the most part, there are certain exceptions, but for the most part, you are not allowed to get additional money when values go up because of reappraisal or triennial update. Essentially, if you think about it, that's considered inflation. Those are inflationary values. You cannot generate more money through outside millage. So when your values went up 10% on residential property, your tax rates on all your outside levies were reduced by 10%.
Right, so like in May of 17, the community passed a 5.99 mil levy, which brought in about $6 million. That will bring in about $6 million in perpetuity, in essence.
Except for new construction.
Except for new construction.
New
So
construction,
as
right.
values went up 10%, we don't get more money, which is
Correct.
why so many districts have to go for more operating
Yeah.
money, because they don't see more
es-
revenue.
Essentially what happens for that, for that levy, it was how, what, 6.99?
5.99.
Let's say, we'll do 6 for the math. So for that levy, you had a 10% increase, and the rate would have been reduced to 5.4.
Right.
So it would have been reduced by 0.6%, which would have offset the 10% increase in the value. So, no, so the way it's supposed to work is on all the existing property, so property that was in effect the year before and the current year, when you go through your reappraisal, you have to get the same amount of money in aggregate from those properties following the reappraisal update as you did the year before. And so the rates adjust to make sure that happens.
And then the 20 mil floor,
What the 20 mil floor says is that as your values go up, your rates get reduced. So as long as you have more than 20 mils levied, which would be 3 inside millage and current expense voted combined, as long as you have more than 20 mils levied, as those rates are being reduced as values go up, once the aggregate rate hits 20, can't go down anymore. It's frozen at 20. What it means then is if you're at the 20 mil floor and you go back, we get a 10% increase in residential values like you did in 18, you would actually get a 10% increase in revenue on all 20 mils. Districts like to get to the 20 mil floor. Most suburban districts can't get there. Most suburban districts have tax rates that there's no practical way to get there. I came from a district that was a wealthy suburban district. We weren't in the same universe as the 20 mil floor, and have never had a chance to be there.
Anything else?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
Great
Very
job.
much.
Great job.
Okay. Roll call.
Well, do we have,
Oh, sorry.
no, I'm sorry, I mean, that was a 5-year forecast. There's a couple of other things,
Yeah.
JP Morgan Chase
Chase
Depository, there's no
Depository.
information attached. John, do you want to?
I thought I sent an update, but maybe not.
You did?
On JP Morgan Chase was the, we deleted the credit cards from P and C because of security problems. And so we opened up a JP Morgan Chase here downtown Brecksville to handle our credit cards and possibly some investments. Approval to set up these new funds. I need to set up new funds for the wellness grant for the money we just received. The tennis court fundraiser and the baseball car raffle. It's just approval of setting up these funds. And that's it.
That's it, yeah.
Any questions?
No, just maybe, obviously not right now, but maybe we can get some of those details and put them in on the agenda. That way anybody that comes in and looks to see, because right now there's no content on those line items.
With the,
What do you want him to put? Like,
Well, the description of what he just shared with us. I think you did send us some information out, but JP these are actions that we are voting on, right? I mean, we are
Right.
approving this. So
Right.
right now, these are just a simple line item with no detail to them. So we have the detail, it just needs to be reflected in the agenda. So, and it doesn't have to be done that right now. I'm talking about going, even
Forward.
after the meeting, sometime this week, we'll just update. We've done that before, just
Okay.
put the information in
like
that
a
way.
Google Doc with a quick description of what
okay.
the transaction
Or
was.
just send it over to
I
Jen
thought,
and have her post it.
I thought it was on there, but I'll check
Okay.
it.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Dolson,
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler,
Yes.
Mr. Mack.
Mrs.
Mrs. Mack.
Yeah, that dude's not here. All right, yes. Okay, item 14, closing items. We have A, announcements. Any announcements? Our next board meeting will be on a Wednesday, November 20th, right, Mrs. Megger?
Yes?
Okay, very good. We will be at OSBA conference November
10th and 11th and 12th?
10th and 11th, and we will be having some friends join us as well. So it's going to be a very educational time. That our administration will be joining us for the first time, which will be a vast improvement. So there you go. Anything else? Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Mr. Dolson,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack.
Yes. We are now adjourned. See you November 20th.